Hey guys, Bugcat7 here. Okay, it is Friday, June 13th, 2025, and I'd like to thank you for visiting the Stonewall Research 2 channel here on YouTube. I really do appreciate it. Alright, guys, well, it's time again to discuss the similarities between the Adena people of the Ohio Valley in North America here with the Beaker people of Europe. And this is because of the many similarities between the two cultures. But not only the cultures, but the physical anatomy of these two ancient peoples who apparently were larger in size and what they would describe as being slightly more robust, which is a euphemism for larger. Not only taller, but larger. Okay? Unlike people who suffer from gigantism, who seem sort of long and thin, are very frail, often very weak, and fatigued is a symptom of gigantism. So, we're probably not talking about that because if you look at the craniometric data for the Adena people. Okay, we pretty much know what they are for the Beaker people. We'll go over that again. But the craniometric studies show that they're high vaulted cranial um, skulls were characterized by being extremely high vaulted, brachycephalic, and it says here with cephalic indices ranging from 89 to 100, well, it's pretty huge. Okay, so according to this article, they practice cranial deformation, flattening the occipital region, the back of the skull, which further enhanced the height of the cranial vault. This practice likely enhanced pre-existing congenital features. So the height of the cranial vault. Well, I don't think so because can cranial deformation increase the interior volume of the skull? No! Cranial deformation does not increase the interior volume of the skull, also known as cranial capacity or brain size. While artificial cranial deformation alters the shape of the skull through methods like head binding or flattening, it is generally believed that the brain inside still achieves a volume comparable to that of an unmodified skull. See? So you can increase the interior vault of it, like it says over here. Okay? So they should make up their mind about that. Either you can or you can't. But you should make up your mind. But see, the studies done by some scientists, um, I like what this says. Potential link to European Beaker people. Some researchers have noted unique cranial features shared between Adena people and European Beaker people, who also exhibited brachycephalic skulls, heavy brow ridges, and narrow faces. Early research by Webb and Snow suggested a possible origin from Middle America is no longer considered the prevailing view, with current thinking emphasized local origins for the Adena culture. Early 19th and 20th century newspaper reports of giant skeletons were also generally dismissed by modern researchers due to potentially inaccurate field measurements and misinterpretations. Okay, so here's why they're dismissed because of Alice Herdliska, who came out with this in 1934. Measure your giant carefully. Okay, this is in the archives here for Science News, all right, from 1934. Okay, so measure your giant carefully and its size will shrink. The American public may scoff a bit at fairies, but it would like very much to believe in giants, at least so it appears from a thin but steady stream of letters received at the Smithsonian Institution. I gotta sign in to so anyway, he said the problem is that people without proper credentials were looking at the skeletal anatomy of these supposed giant skeletons and misinterpreting them as being giant based on the thigh bones, which, you know, by the way he describes it, it was basically what he's saying, that people who had plenty of credentials and the ability to, analyze a human skeletal anatomy couldn't tell that they were bigger or not. But see, the problem is that in the 12th annual report from the Bureau of Ethnology, okay, they found skeletons, okay, some described as gigantic, between 7 and 8 feet in length, during the Smithsonian's mound explorations in the 1880s. Okay, so it says here, a challenge to the myth of the mound builders. While there was popular notion in the 19th century that a lost race or civilization, perhaps giants, built the mounds, the careful studies by the Bureau of Ethnology demonstrated the mounds were built by the ancestors of historic North American tribes, which in a sense is true. They're not lying about that. Of course, they have the DNA of these giant peoples in them. They certainly had to, because in the 1800s, when they did studies of height and growth, they found that the Native American peoples of the um, Plains Indians were among the tallest people in the world. Well, why would that happen? See, the problem is that the tallest people in the world can't be explained, just like the Frisians can't be explained, see, because it's well known to zoologists that members of the same species are all within relatively the same size. There are no exaggerated individuals. Okay, are no exaggerated sized individuals or minimally sized individuals either. That only seems to happen in the human species. Okay, and from what I could tell, from what this expert said, the guy who did all the DNA research on Neanderthals and then the Denisovans, okay, that Robert Shepard had on his channel, okay, this fellow right here, who we are, how we got here. Okay, so it's a book that he wrote. He's the DNA researcher on the Denisovans and Neanderthals, and he said that we're probably a conglomeration of hundreds of different types of humanoid species from the past, judging by his research in the DNA, and also that apes might have come from humans and not the other way around. Okay, that's what he said. Okay, the top DNA researcher who wrote this book, right, at this lecture that Robert Shepard covered on his video on his channel. Okay, so Alice Liska was the guy who ruined it all. After that, nobody can consider these things ever again. The only problem is that Alice Liska was out of his mind. Everybody knows it now. Okay, we don't have to think about it too much. All right, and okay, so here's some of the general news on Alice Hurdliska. Smithsonian bone doctor scavenged thousands of body parts. Meet Alice Hurdliska, FDR's favorite eugenicist. Here's an interesting story that you probably never heard of. While FDR was looking around to find somebody who could sort of figure out for him what he should do with the Jewish immigrants that were coming here to America because they didn't want to accept them and whatnot, he hired Alice Hrdlicka, the eugenicist. Okay, this evolution news here. Darwin inspired eugenics and racial pseudoscience are like some sort of insidious and hideous thing. Okay, I read some of the article there. Okay, so this is we're talking about a guy who ran the Smithsonian Bureau of Ethnology for 40 years. That's why C.W. Saran, the first man to ever write a book on archaeology ever, talked about him and said that the guy was out of his mind, and all the people who would, quotes from the people who worked under him that he was a tyrant, okay, and basically was an idiot, okay, because you can see other people on YouTube have done a few videos. Like this one says nonsense with an arrow pointing to his head because his theories about the Bering land bridge crossing are all dismissed now because you have these older civilizations in the South America that somehow happened before civilizations in North America somehow. Okay, so if cavemen came by boat before the ice age and all that kind of stuff like that, well, how they get here by boat? Okay, so anyone with a boat to get here to the Americas, hence all they find, all the cultures from the past, who probably set up garrisons here because we know from Charles C. Mann's book, okay, that there were millions of people living here, okay, and if some of them were these large-sized people that Alice Hurdlisk has said that didn't exist, that we all know now that he's full of crap and full of nonsense, okay, and nothing that he said can ever be believed, even though they continue to honor him where he came from in Europe. I guess they don't want to consider about all these things about him, right? And they have, targeted people, you know, they gave the Aleutian people back the brains or whatever. He was cutting off the heads of their recently dead relatives. That's why this whole thing came up, because of the change in the theory about the Bering land bridge crossing. Okay, unauthorized remains for the Smithsonian disproportionately stole black people's brains and also indigenous people. So this guy was trying to prove some sort of eugenicist theory and all kind of stuff. This is the guy who ran the Smithsonian. So this is what was going on. So if the guy said there's no giants, of course there were. Okay, of course there were. All right. So why do we know this? Because we know about the um, the Beaker culture and their physiology, which their physical anthropology, okay, found they were described as tall, heavy boned, and brachiocephalic, okay, just as they described the Adena people, okay, and their craniometric studies, okay, as being rugged, okay, rugged, muscular, brachycephalic type, okay, just like the Beaker people, okay, tall, heavy boned, and brachycephalic, not with gigantism at all, not these people with so fatigued they can't move around and all kinds of stuff, because that's the symptoms of gigantism, right? But they want to associate with that. Yet, also in these articles, they never mentioned the size of these craniometric studies and all kind of stuff. But here's the report from the Bureau of Ethnology. Giant skeletons, they dismiss it in the same thing. No, but they're just descendant, from the historical Native Americans. No, they are not. They're completely distinct, different people anatomically, which is obvious. Okay, if they were like the Beaker people, you heard what just was said about it. Okay, so it can't be by the people who study growth and height. Okay, and here in this article from Ancient Origins with Jason Jarrell and Sarah Farmer, who wrote a book, The Ages of the Giants, who gave this sort of conclusion of their own that possibly the Adena came from the Beaker people and crossed over here from Europe because this is the New World, and they also have this New World bias. Okay, So here's the people who did the research on it. Okay, here, and that report from the Bureau of Ethnology. Back up here again. Hold on. Okay, in the 1880s, the Eastern Mound Division of the Smithsonian discovered a number of gigantic skeletons in their wanton destruction of North American tumuli. The 12th annual report of the Bureau of Ethnology documents numerous gigantic skeletons found by Smithsonian agents. Near the original surface of the man, lying at full length upon his back, was one of the largest skeletons discovered by the Bureau agents, the length, as proved by actual measurement, being between 7 and 8 feet. In the center of the mound, 3 feet below the surface, was a ball 8 feet long and 3 feet wide. In the bottom of this lay a skeleton fully 7 feet long. The length from the base of the skull to the bones and the toes was found to be 7 feet 3 inches. It probably therefore that this individual, when living, was 7.5 feet high, 7.5 feet high. Okay, so these skeletal features. Okay, so you're talking about this extraordinary skeletal features and these people who did the research for it. Okay, so so these people did the research in 1957 on the skeletal remains of the Adena, and the cranium represented the highest skull vaults reported anywhere in the world. Okay, indices measured a range from 89 to 100, which is ultra large internal volume. Adena people practiced artificial flattening of the occipital region when added to the height of the cranial vault, which they said can't be, cannot be. No, cranial deafness does not increase the interior volume of the skull. No, no, no. Okay, so these guys thought about it a little bit here. Those skulls with slight or no deformation, undeformed, present similar proportions. It is likely that many, if not most, of the skull characteristics so typical of Adena are of genetic nature. Webb, Snow, and Beatty did the research in 1957. All right, so genetic, not cranial deformation, because it can't increase the volume. See? So, it doesn't matter what Alice Hrdlicka said. Okay, so let's talk more about the similarities between these two peoples and these two cultures. And yet, we can see something more recently that adds to the hypothesis that these people are somehow related by culture, most certainly. Okay, so I asked a question to the AI here: what are the similarities between the Bell Beaker culture and the Adena Hopewell culture? While geographically and temporally distinct, the Bell Beaker culture, so they had nothing to do with each other, dating back to around 2800 BC in Europe, and the Adena Hopewell cultures flourishing from approximately 800 BC to 500 AD in eastern North America, share some striking similarities. Okay, so all of the dates in the supposed New World are always going to be a lot later, and the ones in Europe are going to be in more in the past because that's the old world. So we have this New World bias going on. Okay, New World bias. Are the Americas really the New World? Are they really the New World? Okay, so existing civilization. It's crucial to acknowledge that the Americas were not new to the indigenous peoples who have been living there for thousands of years and have developed thriving civilizations. Okay, is all this. So using the term New World is passe now because it implies certain things that don't seem to be evident anymore. Okay, as the histories in the Americas start going further and further and further and further and further and further back in time from Alice Schroeder's time, who said that people arrived in the Americas some 4,000 years ago or something like that. And not what you're finding today, 20 and 30 and all of these figures that go way beyond the Bering land bridge crossing. Okay, so let's talk more about this. Okay, so I think they got the dates wrong. Okay, and that they somehow the geology in the Americas, which doesn't seem to match any of the geology around the world because something happened to it. These cataclysms and catastrophes that happen here and also in Europe, places like that, which often how these things often happen, like the summer, the year without a summer in 1816 when a volcano went off and people were starving in North America and in Europe. But doesn't seem to be any problem with anybody else in the world. Okay, so social stratification and the elite classes, just like this. All right, and you can assume also the Bell Beaker culture have something going on similar to this. Okay, just like these people, the Watusi people here. Listen,
Meanwhile,
listen.
replacing his father, who is busy with the hunt, he has another duty: to supervise the ceremonial dance of the Wahutu farmers, subjects of the Watusi nobility. This dance occurs at planting time each year. High into the air go the...
So, like the 12-year-old kid here, who's like almost 6 foot tall, is, his job is to tell the subjects of the Watusi here, who they now call the Houthis, right? And who knows, they make no mention of it. If you look up Watusi people, okay, they don't make no mention of their height, any sort of history beyond like 1960s here, cattle herders, but they talk about the class structure here, which is evident by it, and this is what's going on with the Bell Beaker people and the Adena people. Both cultures exhibit evidence of social hierarchies and distinct elite classes, like the tall people with a different anatomy are the ruling class over average sized people. Like here we can see the father, the king there, with these bison over here that they take care of these cows here, and here's the
The head herdsman
king
has called
here,
attention to an
right?
ailing animal.
And here's an average sized guy,
The
like
prince
our height,
sends his son
average
off to play with some
5'8",
comrades
5'7".
before he begins
Here's
the
the king.
incantations which
Here's
are
the average
calculated
size
to restore the cow
of
to health.
the class that he ruled over. Okay, significantly larger. Both cultures exhibit evidence of social hierarchy distinctly. Bell Beaker archaeological evidence, particularly from burials, suggests that certain individuals, perhaps based on craft specialization or wealth, held positions of higher status. These elites may have controlled the distribution of valuable goods and held a degree of political influence. Adena Hopewell. Burial practices indicate the existence of an elite class, with the important individuals receiving more elaborate burials and accompanying grave goods. The Hopewell, in particular, show strong evidence of social stratification through their mortuary practices. Significance: the presence of social stratification in both cultures suggests organized societies with some level of centralized power or leadership, even if not fully developed chiefdoms. I think they were fully developed, similar to that of the Watusi. Okay? So we have evidence of this dynamic happening in modern times. That's a travel film from 1939, but of course, if you look anything up about Watusi here, they change the whole narrative, don't mention their size. you're understanding from a totally different perspective than they're talking about in that 1939 travel film where they were probably honest about it. Okay, because you can see it with your own eyes on film. Both cultures engage in widespread trade, connecting them with distant regions. The Bell Beaker people traded their pottery and other artifacts across large areas of Europe, likely including metals like copper and bronze, as well as luxury items. Similarly, Adena and Hopewell sites contain exotic materials sourced from distant locations, such as copper from the Great Lakes and shells from the Gulf Coast, indicating extensive trade networks. These networks facilitated the exchange of goods and ideas, sort of in like a forum. We're going to talk about forums pretty soon. I'm going to read you an article about forums in ancient Rome. Very interesting what was going on in these forums, besides goods and ideas. Advanced craftsmanship. Both cultures are noted for their high level of craftsmanship and artistic expression. The Belgica culture is known for its metalworking, producing bronze items and their distinctive decorated pottery. The Adena and Hopewell cultures are recognized for their intricate pottery, copper artifacts, and stone tools, often featuring animal and natural motifs. In summary, despite being geographically and temporally separated, the Bell, Beaker, and Adena Hopewell cultures show similarities in social stratification, burial practices, trade networks, and craftsmanship. These shared characteristics prove insights into these prehistoric societies. So it's just very interesting, all of those things. Okay, so up to now, right here in my video, so we heard about all of these things, their similarities there, including their anatomy being close to being almost identical, although the Bell Beaker people are slightly smaller than the Adena people. But the Adena people are not slightly more robust, they're significantly larger. Okay? And I've gone over on this channel where these burials dug up in New York State by William A. Ritchie, Bill Ritchie, who's the head archaeologist for New York State, dug these skeletal remains up, which disintegrated immediately. And apparently, he didn't want to get any, measurements or anything, but plenty of large skeletal remains were found in New York State prior to Bill Ritchie in the 1960s. So, all right, so these shared characteristics provide insights into the prehistoric society. So let's take a look at some of these things. Okay, they mentioned pottery. Okay, all right. So here's some Adena and Hopewell pottery here. You notice their pottery here. Very interesting. Very decorative. Extremely decorative. You notice their shape and size, relative size. Okay. Okay, so here are some of the Belbeger pottery, and included with this pottery is these copper arrowheads, kelp axe, and these tang knives and blades here, copper blades here. Okay, so beyond the pottery itself, um, which have very striking similarities. Okay, except that the Adenas seem to be more decorative with these pictures and designs on them. And the Bell Beaker stuff is nice too. It also has some designs on them, some line designs on them and stuff like that. So very similar. And these copper artifacts interest me because here are some Native American copper artifacts that look identical to those Bell Beaker tang blades, arrowheads, copper arrowheads, just so incredibly similar, almost identical in some cases. There's some tanged arrowheads, copper arrowheads, tanged knife blades, and whatnot. So, like, in some cases, like identical, the copper artifacts. Look, up in here, okay? So, see, all right, so you have almost identical pottery, size, shape, everything, just little different designs there. You have metal or copper metalwork, weapons, etc., etc. And what are these things here? This is with the Bell Beaker people here. Here's what they say down here. They say stone wrist guards, which I don't think these things are stone wrist guards here, but the Bell Beaker people do have something like they call wrist guards, but that would be these things right here. Okay, these look more like they were talking about stone wrist guards here with these two holes in the top, two holes in the bottom, very similar here. But here's one with just two. All right, but I don't think these things are the same things as these things right here, or even they are what they say they are. Okay, here's some of this type right here. All right, so these other things with holes in it. What are those things? Okay, here's what they have to say about these wrist guards here. Bell-Beaker stone wrist guards, often found in graves in the late Neolithic and early Bronze Age, were likely not always functional wrist protectors for archery. While traditionally thought of as archers' braces, analysis suggests they were more likely personal adornments, potentially part of a larger decorative leather or metal wrist guard, according to a study published by Cambridge University Press. Okay, so they talk about these wrist guards here, but these other things here, um, these other things here are most likely not wrist guards at all, and probably are what they call gorgets. Okay, here's a bunch of what they call Native American gorgets. These stones with holes in them, often two holes, sometimes one. It's similar to that of the Bell Beaker people. Here's a whole bunch of different ones right here. All right, all sorts of gorgets. All right, is that really what these things are? Wrist guard artifacts? I don't think so. I think what you got there in Europe, there, archaeologists, is gorgets. All right. Okay. So far we got the all the similarities here. Okay. And what else? What else is similar? Well, just recently they found Bell Beaker earthworks in Spain that they didn't know about. This is recent 2016, I believe. Okay, here's the LiDAR imagery of this. The whole big rub about it is these concentric rings. Okay, these earthworks with these concentric rings, and you can see it has some, some openings in here and whatnot. So, are there any um Adena or Hopewell mounds that have concentric rings? Well, I think there are. Okay, let's see if I can. Okay, Take a good look at this. Okay, you see this thing here? Here's a Portsmouth, Ohio mound that's reconstructed through this illustration with these concentric rings. You see this thing right here? And you see this thing on the LiDAR image in Spain. Do you see any similarities there? Okay. Just take a close look at that. You see any similarities there? Okay, yet another recently discovered similarities in these construction techniques here. Okay, yet to add to the notion that these people are sharing a shared culture, a shared, you know, physical anatomy that so closely resembles each other that they're definitely related cousins. Okay, so think about it. What was going on in the past during these times they say that these people existed? Right? Where did all these people come from? Okay, just because you can't have people of exaggerated size showing up out of nowhere. There's got to be some workup to how these people got so big because it just is not explainable by the scientists who try to explain height and growth. They can't explain it. Doesn't make any sense to them. So, in any case, with all these similarities, I don't think this is a coincidence. All right. There's something more going on here, something more that they're very confused about. I've read extensively about this. They say one thing and not another. They believe in Alice Whisker and no giants, trying to say they have gigantism, all this stuff. On the same page, they dismiss their own discoveries, So when they're there in black and white in the Smithsonian Annual Report from the Bureau of Ethnology, as Jason Jarrell and Sarah Farmer point out, and what the later research scientists said in the 50s, that there seems to be a genetic component to their skeletal anatomy, probably isn't this cranial deformation because it can't increase the size of the bulk of the skull. Okay, so anyway, guys, I just thought I might bring this up again and talk about it because there's just too many similarities here to be coincidence. All right, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, then it just may be a duck and not the baloney story that